I've just been on the Arcane train. Choo choo, motherfucker! Yes, I know I'm about a month too late. Get off my dick, okay? I had shit to do. But I finally got around to watching it, and let me tell you, I had literal goosebumps so many times while watching this show. I had to make a video about it. Let me just preface this by saying that you do not need to know anything about League of Legends to enjoy Arcane. Because I sure didn't, and I definitely enjoyed it. So let's just get rid of that toxic thinking altogether. I think a lot of people initially were put off by the fact that it's based on the game because they just assumed that without the context from the game, they wouldn't be able to fully watch the show and know what was going on. I admit I thought the same thing. I thought it was just going to be some fan service bullshit. But there were so many people all over my social feeds blowing their loads over the animation and the visuals and how just amazing the entire show was that I felt like I had to just give it a go. And let me tell you that I did not regret it. So in case you don't know what Arcane is, okay, if you live under a rock, that's fine, you do you. But it's an animated series that's out on Netflix now. It's based on League of Legends, which is a game from Riot Games. Riot Games partnered with French animation studio Fortiche Production to create the masterpiece that is Arcane. I haven't been this in love with something animated since Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, I've enjoyed animated stuff. I'm an animator, but this is on another level. Arcane is probably like, why are you so obsessed with me? And I'm like, because you are literally a work of art. Like, you could pause this at any frame and literally print it out and put it on your wall. Any frame, guys. It is literally art the entire way through. This shit is movie level quality, just excellence in every way, and there is so much that you could talk about. The editing, the voice acting, the art direction, the special effects. Everything is perfect, except maybe the soundtrack in some points, but a lot of that is personal preference, I think. I'm not gonna go into that too much. I'm gonna limit myself as much as possible to the visuals and the animation because that is my forte. That's what I do professionally. Arcane has a very distinctive visual style and it sets so many artists' minds ablaze because it's just so stunning and inspiring and different to the usual overly clean, overly cute, pretty and soft 3D animation that we're so used to. And it sometimes feels a little soulless, that very perfect 3D animation, which is why I think this has appealed so much to so many people. So yeah, it's 3D obviously, but with a twist. Just imagine that I'm twirling like a moustache here. There are also a lot of 2D elements and it has a very painterly texture style, very stylized, with animation that sort of teeters between, I wouldn't say cartoony because it's not, but it's distinctly animated, like it's not mocap stuff, while also being quite realistic and cinematic. It's immediately apparent that this series had a big budget, both in terms of money and time. It would have taken so many years to develop and produce this. It's got a sort of mixed media vibe with the 2D and 3D elements, and the animation style is very grounded in reality, and you end up feeling like you're watching a stunning painted illustration that's been literally brought to life. Not like you're watching something that's been animated. The characters feel so real and purposeful in their movements and the way their emotions are portrayed. The environments and world building are also incredibly detailed and nuanced, and you feel like it's a real world that you're getting a window into. The sets don't feel like they're built to just support the characters and their story. It genuinely feels like a world that has been existing and running long before we ever heard about Arcane. The background characters are not just one-dimensional props in the background. They feel like living, breathing people going about their lives. There are so many subtle details to the animation and expressions, and for the most part, the characters' proportions are much more realistic than their League of Legends character designs, and they move in a very realistic way. But it doesn't teeter over into the uncanny valley because of that beautiful painterly style and the way certain features and elements and proportions are somewhat exaggerated but not in a completely ridiculous way. Now, this leaning towards reality within the animation style, the actual way the characters move, as well as the designs and look dev, really helps to draw the audience in and gets us to relate to the characters. We take the show more seriously than we otherwise might have. We empathize with them a lot more because they're more relatable. If you're not a League of Legends fan, I wasn't, but I've seen the original character designs and there have been some changes with the proportions and clothing being a little more realistic now in Arcane. Like if you look at this previous design of Vi with her tiny waist, impractical heeled boots, and these ginormous gauntlets, compared to the character design from Arcane. In Arcane, her proportions are a little more realistic, she has a more realistic sized waist, her clothes are more practical for her environment and what she does, which is, you know, fight a lot and do parkour and just generally be really cool and strong. Have you seen her arms? How strong she is? Have you seen her fight? She is just so cool. You don't get cooler than that. Anyway, I think it really helps to sell the realism of the show, bring in a little more believability, because so much of the storyline is based on emotions and the character building and emotional and personal development of the characters. And their previous sort of unrealistic proportions would have been a barrier to that, pulling us out of it. If you felt like at any moment in an epic fight that one of the fighters was going to snap in half at the waist, you know? Part of the impact and that visceral effect you get from the fights is how convincing and realistic they are. The texturing seems to be a blend between something like a toon shader or NPR, but obviously not your vanilla toon shader because it's got some hand-painted elements with no specular on the characters. You can see at some points where there's an environment light shining on them and they turn, you don't get that specularity that you usually have on skin or their clothes or jewelry. Even on these gold parts on Mel, the shine is actually part of the texture, while you still have the characters being affected by the key lights and rim lights in the environment. So the characters still feel grounded in the scene, with certain shadows and highlights and variations in tones added to the texturing. It's got a very oil-painted effect, not quite cel-shaded, but the tones are not really fully blended. So it's not like the soft, very blended shading you'll see in stuff from like Pixar. And there are a lot of different tones on the skin and clothes and everything pretty much, which also gives this really authentic, sometimes pretty gritty feel. The backgrounds are mostly painted 2D layers or matte paintings with some 3D elements for the immediate environment, and of course props are 3D. Matte paintings are literally 2D paintings in layers in 3D space, so you still get that depth and parallax effect when the camera moves, and you wouldn't realize they're 2D unless you were specifically looking. This helps with production time and budget, and matte painting is a really common technique in movies and shows for stuff that is far off in the distance, but a lot more of the environment elements in Arcane are 2D than what is usually used. And it's not just the stuff that's really far off in the distance. And this is also what contributes to that feeling of a painting or illustration come to life. The 2D effects are another element that needs talking about in the visual treatment. They're part of what makes Arcane so special, and they're similar in some ways to Into the Spider-Verse, with that marrying 3D with 2D effects. So instead of using 3D simulated smoke and explosions and gunshots in the scene, they're all 2D. And it gives us this mixed media feeling, again like we're looking at an illustration or maybe a graphic novel or something like that come to life. It gives this feeling of like, this is artisanal. We have 3D animation that isn't as clean and perfect and flawless as what we're used to seeing. And when I say flawless, I don't mean Arcane has flaws like mistakes. It's deliberate flaws to make it feel more crafted, so it doesn't feel like something soullessly generated by a computer. And then these 2D elements that further give us that feeling of it being lovingly crafted. Like we have these hand-drawn frame-by-frame 2D effects that marry so well with the 3D scene, it really ends up feeling like you're literally watching a work of art. The effects also seem to have been animated at a lower frame rate, and it gives the animation as a whole a little bit of that extra texture and interest, and it's something totally unique. Another thing I love is the way we see things from the character's points of view or when we're focused on certain characters. There are these subtle changes, and sometimes not so subtle in the case of Jinx, in the way we see things. So with Jinx, we get these really jagged, scribbled, violent, but childlike 2D overlays for a few frames, signifying the trauma and PTSD she's still suffering from. It doesn't happen as often when she's chilled, like when she's working on one of her bombs, or like in the creative zone, but it gets worse the more emotional or disturbed she gets. And it's this sort of constant chaotic insertion into everything she does, and it gives you an insight into what she's battling with mentally. It's like a child who's angry and goes and scribbles over the family photos. Her memories in childhood were so tainted and she's still stuck in that childlike mentality, and the trauma follows her everywhere. She never knows a moment of peace. With Echo, we get these awesome sort of graphic novel style treatments. It was pretty heartbreaking in that fight with Jinx, where they're both taken back to when they were just kids playing a game together. And we get those cuts between that idyllic, innocent childhood game and the current harsh reality where they're literally fighting to the death. And then you have that moment when Echo has Jinx pinned down and he's looking down at her. And we see her face from his perspective, and her face has lost that harshness it usually has. It's much softer and rounder, her eyes are bigger. Even the way she's holding her mouth is like how she did when she was a kid, and her teeth were a little oversized because she still had to grow into them. And it's reminiscent of how she looked as a child. And Echo is remembering who she used to be and can't bring himself to deal that final death blow. It's intense. There's so much thought put into every single aspect of the visual storytelling. So much is communicated without saying a word, with the most subtle changes in expressions, body language, lighting, music, every aspect of the scene communicates something to the audience. The camera work also plays a huge part in how real it all feels. It feels organic, not like you've placed and animated a camera in a 3D program, but like there's an actual cameraman holding and adjusting the camera, and that's also what contributes to this amazing feeling of a blend between reality and animation. There's a handheld aspect to a lot of the shots, and even parts where you have the focus adjusting as you watch, and parts where you're following a character and the camera overshoots slightly before being brought back. And it feels really authentic and not manufactured or robotic because it's not overly perfect and controlled. You have moments when the light reflects in the lens and we have camera flares, and sometimes it looks like dust caught on the lens. In this scene where we're in the rain and we're looking up at Silco, the raindrops are landing on the lens. It's these tiny details that a lot of people wouldn't notice, but it gives us that feeling of a live action. Fight scenes are obviously plentiful and they don't get boring. Now, I love fight scenes when they're done right and for a reason. Nothing is worse than back-to-back fight scenes without any purpose that all follow the same formula with no nuance, no allowance for the differences in characters and their relationships, no storytelling further than the fact that these characters are fighting and there's lots of blood and violence. And often animated fight scenes lack impact and weight, and it all feels a bit like a pantomime. Not the case here though. You can almost feel every punch. There's blood and stuff, but it's not gratuitous and it's a realistic amount, not these ridiculous dramatic bright red sprays that are often used. The body mechanics are solid, as is the timing and spacing, and honestly, the animation is just perfect in every way. You get moments of slow motion, but it's very purposeful, and it serves to highlight very specific moments or points on the scene. Like here in the scene near the beginning. You've got this tableau of violence where everyone is fighting in the alleyway. Powder's friends and her sister are getting f***ed up and fucking others up, and it slows down in this almost beautiful moment. It's almost like a dance, with Powder there in the background, but she's our main focal point, perfectly framed by this violence. Cowering against the wall, feeling terrified and a little bit useless with all this happening around her, while she's petrified and frozen. This slow motion moment lets us actually concentrate on Powder, because without the slowing down, we're too busy watching all the action around us, and we don't get to fully understand or see how Powder is feeling right now. Or here in one of the coolest scenes with Vi, when she's on the bridge facing off against this massive, brutal looking dude. Look at that scale when he comes and stands right in front of her. And we cut to her looking up at him from a high angle, so we can really get how much smaller she is. And there's just determination on her face, like, I'm gonna do my best to f this guy up. And she takes a deep breath and gets ready in her fighting stance, preparing herself for a real battle. And he tilts his head like, this bitch is crazy. Kind of like how you look at a little bug coming to try sting you before you squish it. He pulls back ready to just stab her. She sees the knife, and we've got her face framed really nicely here between the gauntlets, with his body taking up a lot of the screen and her here in the bottom right. So all your attention is on her right now, and you see her expression change, like, oh shit, it's happening. And then a very sharp knife is coming towards her. She's even doing that mouth where you're bracing for something you're dreading. And you see her arm sort of relax slightly as her attention focuses on the knife more than her stance. And then she quickly recovers to brace herself for it and brings her gauntlets closer to her face for protection. The knife is also, right in the forefront of what we're seeing, so you can't miss it. And he pulls back in anticipation and to gather that power, then brings it forward really fast. We see a close-up of the knife. Obviously, this is what Vi is focusing on right now too, because it's the immediate threat. And it's coming forward really quickly with a lot of power behind it, so there isn't really much of an arc in that action at all. And in this next cut, we get to focus on her face as she prepares for the impact, and the knife comes up and glances off her gauntlet, and is propelled upwards with that driving force as she blocks it. And that action follows through in the next cut, as her body also counters the blow and falls back a little with that impact. You see her stance changing a bit and her muscles flexing as she's absorbing that blow and the follow through from her attacker as he's still moving with the momentum of his strike. And you see the spacing has slowed down a bit here with the ease out of the motion. And then she recovers and gathers her strength, and we've got some anticipation before pushing forwards quite fast against his weight. She pushes his knife aside in a sweeping arc. We cut back to her face from a high angle again, as if we're looking down at her from his viewpoint. And all you see is determination and obviously aggression, and her expression's fanning out here. It's really expressive, and she's looking right at him like, I'm gonna make you my bitch. And then she brings her fist up and towards you as the viewer, as if you're him. And the last thing you see here is her eye looking at you in that third of the screen. And it's really effective in sort of foreshadowing her victory here in the uppercut she's about to give him. Like when I saw that eye, I was like, that's the eye of a person who's about to destroy someone. And then we have his incredulous face for a second. He's so shook that this little girl, because she was a girl when this was happening, is about to destroy him. His eyes are wide open, his mouth is open, and then that satisfying impact as the gauntlet connects with his chin, that lovely squash in his face. His whole head compacts a little, and of course his mouth snaps shut, his nose squishes, eyes smaller, the follow through on that gauntlet and how it's pushing his head up further until finally his head snaps backwards. And we've got a bit of overshoot on that. We see his feet literally lift off the ground in the next cut because her punch was just that powerful. This amazing cut of her with her head down in concentration, face set in determination, arm extended out of the frame because it's lifted this douche off his feet. Her stance is powerful and solid, amazing silhouette. The knife right here, this weapon that was going to be used against her now just sitting ineffectual right in front of her like it's nothing. And this incredible gravity-defying slow motion moment. There is so much more that I could still talk about, obviously. I think I actually got a little bit carried away there while dissecting the animation. I doubt anyone even got this far in the video, so I'm gonna stop there. Hopefully, if you haven't watched this show yet, you will give it a good go because it really is incredible. If you're in the animation or creative industries, it's really great to watch and dissect and learn from. And if you're not involved in any of those industries, just watch it because it's dope, yo! Let me know if you guys have watched Arcane and what you thought about it. I'd be very interested to know if anyone didn't actually enjoy it, but even if you did, let me know what you think. And also let me know if you enjoy this sort of video format. I haven't done one like this before where I look at animated series or movies and, you know, dissect them or whatever. So yeah, let me know your opinion, whatever. Thank you as always to my patrons. You guys are the real MVPs and you give me a lot of support and inspiration to keep doing what I'm doing. Thanks for watching. If you got this far, love ya. Bye!